Hello and welcome to another edition of the SportsPro podcast. I am your host, Tom Bassam, coming to you with one of two episodes we've got on your feed this week. On Thursday, you'll be hearing from my colleague Eleanor Kiufa, who's been interviewing Katrina Adams, the former tennis player who later went on to become the president and CEO of the USTA, the chair of the US Open, and the chair of the Fed Cup. Now, Katrina has recently been awarded an award for her work in diversity, equity and inclusion by the IOC. And she spoke to Eleanor on a whole number of topics all around that subject. It's a fascinating interview and well worth checking out. Now, for this episode, I was lucky enough to travel to the Canadian capital of Ottawa to find out all about the impact of the arrival of a new professional women's hockey league team. Now, the PWHL is a relatively new ice hockey competition, but it's been making waves across North America with packed out venues, drawing really big audiences for its TV coverage. And for Ottawa, this has become a real point of passion and a real point of pride. I was lucky enough to speak to Lesley Pincombe, who works in the major events and sports team at Ottawa Tourism, to learn about the impact of the PWHL team and also how the city plans to become an even greater sports destination. But before we hear from Lesley, I'm also going to drop in a conversation that I had with Mike Hirshfeld, who is the general manager of the Ottawa PWHL team, who I was lucky enough to speak to on game day ahead of their recent clash with Montreal at TD Place. Let's hear from that conversation with Mike.
I'm in the bowels of TD Place, and I'm with a very important individual here at Ottawa PWHL. If you could introduce yourself, please, that would be fantastic.
Sure. I'm Mike Hirshfeld. I'm the general manager of the Ottawa PWHL team.
Mike Hirshfeld, thank you very much for coming on the SportsPro podcast. It's a very exciting weekend. You've got a big game today. How has the first season of the PWHL in Ottawa been?
It's been absolutely incredible. You know, I think we anticipated this would be a great market for women's hockey, but it's gone above and beyond. We've sold out virtually every one of our 12 games. We're averaging close to 8,500 fans per match. And, you know, just the way that the fans have embraced us, opened their arms and welcomed us to town, I think it's, again, gone above and beyond what we ever anticipated. So we're absolutely thrilled.
What do you think it says about Ottawa as a place? Like, you're able to launch a new team in the market and immediately become one of the best attended teams in the league?
I think it says a lot about Ottawa as a hockey market per se. It's always been a huge supporter of the game. I think it says a lot about the open-mindedness of the people, you know, willing to come and check out a new sport. And they've really been, I guess, engrossed in the competitiveness, the speed, the skills of these players. So I think it's a real testament to them that they've gotten behind this team and really embraced it.
You say it's a new sport. I mean, obviously hockey's a big thing here in Canada, but women's hockey's not had the same history as men's hockey. Like, you came from background working the NHLPA, right?
Correct.
What have you learned about women's hockey this year that surprised you?
When I say it's new in the sense it's professional. They've never had a true professional league best on best before. I knew the quality of hockey because I worked in the NHL side, as you said, but I don't think I anticipated how skilled they were, how fast they were as players. You know, again, I appreciated how much work went into it, but just to give them the opportunity and the resources that they've had to really act as professionals and so train hard. We have a great medical team. We have a great strength and conditioning team. We have great coaching staff. They've been given all of these resources for the first time in their career, and it's just so exciting to see them embrace it and put the work in to continue to get better. And the games have been so competitive. I think that's why fans have fallen in love with it.
Here today, I've been sort of walking around the venue. Everyone's in Ottawa PWHL shirts. Like, how great is that for you as general manager to kind of see your work coming to fruition?
It's really exciting, but I mean, I'm obviously the leader at the top of the food chain, but it's really been a collaborative effort. We have a great team on the business side here, selling tickets, selling merchandise, doing marketing for us. You know, our hockey ops group, I mentioned some of them before, I think has done a great job. It's a very collaborative organization, and I think that's been a real big part of our success, is that everyone's engaged, everyone wants to see this succeed, again, I think we're in a really good spot coming to the end of year one.
I noticed sort of when I was reading a coverage about the build up of this, that it's really engaged like the youth hockey community, like not just in Ottawa, but in the local area too. That must be something you're quite proud of.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was always a target for us to engage with all the hockey associations here in Ottawa and the greater Ottawa area. I think what's been really exciting for me is it's not just young girls who want to come. It's young boys who want to come and see these athletes, and these young boys appreciate how good they are as well. So that's been great. I think we've also seen great buy-in from, women who are of my generations in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who recognize how incredible this opportunity is, and they didn't have this opportunity when they were playing. So they've been incredibly supportive of us too, because they don't want this thing to disappear. They want this thing to succeed for those generations coming up, because again, they didn't have it for themselves.
As you said, it's been a really successful year one. You talk about succeeding. What's kind of next? What's happening in year two?
Well, we've still got a little bit left in this season, so obviously getting in the playoffs today would be great, competing hard in that and hopefully ultimately winning a championship. But I think for us, next year, we're going to have a draft, so we'll bring in some new players and continue to get stronger as an organization on the hockey side. But here, in Ottawa, we just want to continue to lay roots in the community. We'll be doing a lot of work this summer on the charitable side. Again, just making sure that people know who we are and that we're a presence here that's not just for this year, but for years and decades to come.
Is part of that building into the business community too, reaching out to local partners?
100%. And I think, it's a great time for us. I think businesses appreciate that, in this era of equity and diversity, that getting behind women's sports is a good place to be. You've seen the growth of women's sports globally, whether it's in, the Women's World Cup in soccer or the WNBA with Caitlin Clark. We're at a tipping point, and we're in a really good spot to try and take advantage of that. And I think businesses appreciate the value that this product brings to their marketing efforts.
I mean, it says a lot probably that we're in a venue that was built for the Women's World Cup, right? And now not only does it host a women's ice hockey team, but it's got a kind of thriving entertainment district right around it.
Yeah, it's a great place to play hockey. I think the thing that our players love the most is it's a smaller town, Ottawa, so you live literally 5 to 7 minutes from the rink. So you're not having to commute in 45 minutes or an hour like you might be in some bigger cities. Everything is local, and I think they've been really welcomed by the community because they're living so close by.
One last question. What's something that people don't know about Ottawa as a place that makes it such a unique sports town?
I think, again, fans are incredibly supportive. There's the Senators are sold out regularly. They have the CFL team, the Red Blacks are sold out regularly. So I think they're incredibly supportive. If you play hard and you're passionate about what you do on the field or on the ice, they're going to get behind you. And I think, too, because it's a smaller community, there's a little bit of a chip on your shoulder when you compare it to Montreal or Toronto. And so they really get behind their teams because they want to be that underdog who's taking on the bigger cities, if that makes sense. So
perfect. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Really nice to meet you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Really fascinating stuff there. Just to lift the curtain on that conversation a little bit, we were stood just inside TD Place on game day with baying fans waiting to come into the arena to see their local heroes. And unfortunately, on game day itself, Ottawa did lose 2-0 to Montreal. A couple of days later, I went down to the Ottawa tourism offices to get a little bit more perspective on the impact of the PWHL locally from Lesley Pincombe, but also talk about the city's grand plan for hosting major sporting events. Here's that interview.
I'm Lesley Pincombe. I'm the Vice President of Meetings and Major Events here at Ottawa Tourism. In large part, my role is to oversee our event attraction strategy. So how do we attract large conferences and sporting events to select Ottawa as their host city?
I guess one of the most exciting things that you've kind of had coming into Ottawa as a new sporting attraction has been the Ottawa PWHL team, taking Ottawa tourism completely out of it. What's it like having like a professional women's ice hockey team that you get to go and watch?
I think first it's about time. So the community was already fully primed. Being Ottawa and Canada's capital, obviously we have a huge ice sport culture in this city. So it could be anything from ringette to hockey, and a lot of our youth play both male and female and everything in between. So I think it's not a surprise that the franchise is a success here. I love the game. I think it's really impressive to see these athletes and the level at which they're playing. It's a very fast game with the women. I commend their cardiovascular abilities. It's quite impressive. And, even when you just look at the sheer size of players, versus a men's league, if you look at Chara, who I think is like 7'9" with skates on, versus some of our female athletes, like that's a lot of skating these women have to do. And I was really, really impressed by the level of play and the speed at which they play. But I think most importantly, I look around and I just see such a optimistic future for women's sport. And I think we've entered a new era. I think we're not going back from here. And I don't even think it's just that it's accepted now in society. It is now expected. And I think that's what I love about it. And I look at all these young athletes that are sitting in the stands, again, both male and female, and I look at their faces, I look at their signs, I look at them cheering and the smiles on their faces. And I think it's just going to be a better place for everybody in sport, having everyone being more inclusive.
To just sort of give a little bit of context about specifically skating in Ottawa, right? I didn't know this before I came here, but you can skate on the canals in winter?
Yes. We have this beautiful UNESCO World Heritage site called the Rideau Canal, and it cuts right through the city and then sort of goes down 7 locks into the Ottawa River. We are really a city where 3 rivers meet. A lot of trading was done on these waterways back in the day, and they also still remain a main artery for a lot of boat transit through our lock system from the St. Lawrence and into the Ottawa River. It's a big part of our DNA here is our waterways. It's hard to really go anywhere in the city without seeing a little body of water. But obviously one of the benefits to that is in the winter, the Rideau Canal is drained to a very specific level. And then from there, as the winter, starts and the freezing temperatures come, the National Capital Commission, has a really impressive Zamboni that is able to go onto the ice and prepare it for skating. But it is a pastime favorite, not only for Ottawans, but also for visitors alike. And probably a little bit of a Canadian bucket list thing to do is to come to the capital and skate on the canal and have a beaver tail and a hot chocolate. So
I was at the Ottawa game on Saturday, and I think driving a Zamboni might be my dream job now.
Yeah. It looks like a lot of fun. I think I'd like it to go a little faster for me, but that's okay.
For sure. But I mean, I guess the kind of really nice aspirational thing about that, right, is that young girls can now skate past TD Place knowing that one day, if they really wanted to, they could go and skate in there professionally as a PWHL player. Which is your favourite part, the aspect of like the impact of bringing that team to the city?
I think what it does is it just makes us look to see, like, when you see a success like the Professional Women's Hockey League, I think what it does is it makes organizations like Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group and other professional sports look at Ottawa as somewhere where we can incubate and launch new professional leagues. My hope would be that instead of, attracting maybe more male-only professional sport teams to Ottawa, is kind of playing off of the success that the Professional Women's Hockey League has seen in Ottawa, is to have other professional sports look at Ottawa as a home base for women's professional sport leagues. And we announced recently that we're getting a professional lacrosse team. So that roster, I hope it grows also on the men's side. It's not one or the other. It's just to be able to coexist and to have a balance. And I think Ottawa is really gaining some popularity around our support for women's sports. There's obviously just an appetite for it here. And so I hope there's other professional sport teams that are looking at Ottawa to launch a women's event here.
For sure. I guess the commercial and economic impact as well. Like that means that you go to Lansdowne on a Saturday and it's just another day that you fill up, not just the stadium, but like that area too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there are teams also within drive distance or even just across the border. And so, we're just starting at the very beginning of this journey of having the Professional Women's Hockey League here to say, okay, is it also driving tourism? So, it's one thing when obviously the local community gets behind them and buys tickets and even even us as an organization, we immediately, as soon as it was announced, we bought season tickets. And so I think we have a role in tourism to not only support and entertain and be able to bring prospective customers to games for a night out. I think that all helps when the business ecosystem also supports the ticket sales, and we use it as a corporate hosting opportunity. I think it's really great, and I hope many businesses in Ottawa are doing the same. We do that often with professional sports. So like when you look at NHL teams and, basketball or baseball, it's quite common that corporate companies would have season tickets. But I think we have a responsibility from the corporate side of things to also support some of these newer experimental leagues or professional sports. But now we're starting to sort of look to see like, okay, is there any data to also show that this is driving tourism to our city? So their main purpose for coming may be to see a game, but also, they must be eating in our restaurants and shopping and visiting our attractions. And so I think there's going to be a really positive tourism story that we'll be able to glean into a little bit more once the data starts coming out.
You'd be kind of pleased to hear then there was this guy with a sign at the game on Saturday saying, I've come all the way from New Zealand to be here. So like me from the UK, him from New Zealand, already shows that it's kind of got that international appeal. I mean, you obviously mentioned having season tickets there. What is your role as a tourism board with the team? Like, is it support? Is it working with like outside bodies and bringing them in? What's the role of tourism when it comes to the PWHL?
Well, I'm not sure how public it is, like sort of internationally known, but the league was launched very last minute. So it was sort of like all of a sudden the announcement and the game date started. And so we actually haven't entered into any sort of formal agreement from a marketing perspective. And I think once we see the data, we'll be able to really understand, is there, a role for tourism? Can we help to promote it? I know that we do promote it on our channels, etc. But I think our role will also be to work with the team here to see like, okay, do we want to host a championship here? Do we want, what are some of those bigger events that Ottawa tourism can come to the table? Because we know that will draw visitation to the city. You get some media in, you get the players, you get the families. And so we'll look to work with them to see like, what can we work on in terms of hosting some of the bigger events? And then my hope ultimately too is, are we going to see a IIHF World Women's Championship here? I know that one was recently hosted in Utica, but why couldn't we host one of those here? And maybe some of these players will be playing there one day. So I think that gives us a role from tourism to help see that this franchise is successful and then help support them if they want to bring other events here.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that it's had, TD Place has had more than 8,500 people in it every single week. I guess being able to prove that level of interest consistently is an amazing part of telling that narrative when it comes to going out to those big organizations and saying, look, this is what we've got to offer.
Yeah. And it really hasn't petered off at all. The attendance has remained really strong. And I think that is actually a really good testament to say that there really is a fan base here. It wasn't just everyone wanted to be, part of the excitement around an inaugural game. This goes beyond that. We are seeing hockey aside, we saw similar levels for the CPKC Women's Open PGA event, record numbers. We saw the Women's Pac-4 series that was here last July, record numbers. We've hosted past FIFA women's events, and those also exceeded attendance numbers. So we're starting to see a trend, and it's hard not to pay attention to it. When you're speaking with the event organizers past event, and they say, "Wow, there was something really different here," and we couldn't believe we were breaking numbers in terms of attendance. So I think we really have to now get laser focused and figure out what other events does our community want to see here from the women's side of things, and we'll go after them.
To me, that sounds a lot like women's sports is really a big driver here, right? Like, I think for a long, long time, it was sort of like the narrative was always, women's sports like doesn't get massive attendances, doesn't capture the public in the same way. But it almost seems like here that it's not only captures that audience, but it does so in a way that's completely different to men's sports. I mean, I don't want to talk too badly about the Senators, but like their attendance goes up and down based on how popular they are, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with any of those, professional leagues, obviously the more people, or the more games they're winning, you see a bunch of people get on the bandwagon. Fair weather fans, as they say. But I'm not sure if it's also just a culmination of we have the right size infrastructure for the women's sport at the level in which they need right now for capacities and just the right size facilities. I think that definitely plays a role into it. I hope we get to a place with women's sport where they need NHL size arenas and nothing else will do. So we'll be able to accommodate them and hopefully a new development in our future as well for a new NHL arena. It's definitely on the horizon, but we hope that they'll be filling those buildings one day. But until then, and as the sport grows and gains popularity, I think Ottawa just has the right size population and the right size infrastructure to really make them profitable and make that fan experience and really help them develop, because I think that atmosphere is something that they thrive off of, when they're playing, and that excitement. Playing an empty barn is probably not the best for the morale. So I think, filling up the TD Place Arena every week is something that these women will remember for a long time, that energy in the building.
Yeah, sure. It was fan night there on Saturday, and you could kind of see that they were really grateful just at what happened this season. I think it's been a really great story. Is that something that you've seen, not even in your role, but just as a citizen of Ottawa? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm also starting to really see, and I love this, is that all the players are becoming sort of a little bit celebrity status. They're coming up on my social feeds and the, fit checks before the game and getting a little bit of a public profile in our community. And for me, I think that's where the equality comes in, is that we often see that on the male side. But I love that I'm starting to see that from a women's professional team, because I think that's where the fan base wants them to go. They want to buy merch, and they want to buy memorabilia and things of their favorite players, and they want to consume social media posts about them. And so I think it's really cool to kind of see that whole side of the business coming up. I hope they get to do, we've seen some great sponsors come on board to support the teams, but I really hope that continues. I hope that they don't just see the popularity in their inaugural season and then the corporate sponsors look away. I hope they're in for the long run. I really take my hat off to these sponsors that have signed up in the inaugural season. And I really hope it's a long sponsorship deal. And I really hope that we start to see some great record brand deals, like we've seen on the male sides of sport. Even Caitlin Clark, you're seeing some of these big, high profile professional athletes coming out. And I really am waiting for those record numbers.
Angel City in the NWSL are a really great example of this, right? They went out and did a completely different sponsorship model in terms of okay, you partner with us, we'll give back to the community. But what that's done is made this amazing brand in 3 years. You see it, their sort of presence is much more elevated compared to maybe some of the other teams in the NWSL. The reason why I think that's worked is because previously you talked to a traditional sports audience, which is mostly men. But this opens up a completely different one, not just for sort of fans and consumers, but for brands too. With Ottawa, do you think there's the local interest in that? Do you think that kind of success could be replicated here?
Absolutely. I think the only reason why we probably haven't seen it is because there hasn't been anything to consume to date, So I think that's where the tides are turning. The sport world has been predominantly male. We see it. I see it as a woman who, has a small part to play in event attraction. A lot of the events that I go to on the sports side, conferences, et cetera, are very male dominant. So you certainly see it. But I think that it doesn't mean that there's not room for women, and it doesn't mean that there's not room for these franchises to be successful. They just haven't existed to this date, right? So it's the same on the merchandise side. It's no one knows what those numbers could be in terms of sales, because nobody's ever sold enough merch to really measure to say, oh wow, I had no idea that everybody wants to buy a Brooke Henderson, golf shirt, So I think we're kind of really breaking ceilings here, and I'm not surprised by it one bit. It just hadn't existed before to even, realize there was a demand for this.
Oh, for sure. Taking a bit more of a holistic view, why are sports so important to a city like Ottawa and to Ottawa tourism?
So it might seem a bit granular, but from a community perspective, the healthier our citizens are. Obviously, the more productive, the more they can participate in our ecosystem here, whether it be from an educational perspective or a business community. And so I think we have an invested interest from a municipal perspective to make sure that we have healthy living here. We have so many bike paths, and we close our parkways on Sundays for bike days. And we have so much green space and waterways and parks. And so I just think that people are happier when they can get outside and when they're active and when they feel fit and they're healthy. And so I think that with that type of mindset amongst our citizens and in our community, if also from a tourism perspective, we all have to be singing from that same hymn sheet. And so the more that we bring sport events here and young people in our community can see themselves in those sports or maybe aspire to be an athlete, I think it would lead to healthy choices and healthy lifestyles, right? Because they will hopefully aspire to be that player that they look up to today, So I think the more demonstration sports that we can bring here, or just different sports that we can bring to Ottawa. And I think also when you look at who's making up the population, that's also changing, right? We have aggressive immigration goals in Canada. That means that, something like cricket, which traditionally hasn't been overly popular. We don't have a lot of cricket facilities in Canada, but maybe with all this new immigration, that might be a sport that really resonates with new Canadians. So maybe that's something we need to look at. Right. And so we need to evolve as well of what we're attracting here. And by bringing major sporting events, I think it really gives the youth in our community something to aspire to.
And in particular, I mean, I guess it always goes back to that quite nice quote of like, you can't be what you can't see, right? And it gives you, if you can literally see it right in front of you in your town, that's quite something.
Yeah, I think people need to see examples of it. And I think this is where their popularity that I like to see is, that is a little bit of our society now. And our young people have a lot of access to social media. And so they see that on the men's side of sport. And now that they're starting to see it on the women's side, I think it also just adds that extra, higher profile and a little bit of swagger, that they can look up to and say, oh, wow, she's wearing this or wearing that. And it's all a part of, the commercialization really of the sport business. It's more than just ticket sales, their profiles and personas.
Absolutely. So the next major, I mean, you announced this relatively recently, is Ironman that you've got coming over here. How excited are you guys for that?
So excited. I think that we have the right size city to host it. I'm so excited about the partnership between the National Capital Commission and the City of Ottawa. It's going to be very picturesque. We have a fairly flat route for them. The entire course will be on the Ottawa side of the river. And so that means that the elevation will be fairly consistent. I think we'll see some Ironman personal bests while they're here. I think for Canadians or even people who aren't Canadian, to be able to run by your Parliament buildings and some really iconic national museums or landmarks in our city, I think is a pretty cool thing. So I'm looking forward to it. I also look forward to our community getting involved and getting behind the event. It's going to be an August piece of business, so it could be hot, but it will be a nice time in the city, and it will be very green and very picturesque.
When it comes to that event, what will be your role as an organisation in the build-up, at the time, for delivery? Take me through all of it.
So we obviously help to pull all the partners together that we needed to make this event a success or to secure it, and putting in the bid, working on the financial package to support it. And then from there, once we were awarded it, obviously we had to bring everybody together to make sure that logistically that we could have a great course here. There's more than just saying, yes, we'd like to host. We really need to have, the police, the paramedics, all the security. Obviously we have Parliament buildings, the Prime Minister's here. We have, different types of parliamentary precinct security as well. So, there's a lot of different partners that have to come around a table to make sure that we can provide a safe sporting event as well. And so once that's done and Ottawa was selected, then we'll look to help them promote. Ironman does a lot of that on their own. They have a very strong international brand, but it was very neat, actually. I obviously monitor when we make announcements and just sort of see what people are saying, and just to understand the sentiment and who is speaking about the event and about the announcement. And I didn't realize, but there is a massive triathlon triathlete I don't know what we call them, community, global community, but that was really neat. And I think that's kind of a new consumer for us as well. So we have one of the largest marathons. So, all the running, and we've hosted very successful triathlons here in Ottawa before. So that isn't necessarily new, but of this size, it is going to be really impressive to see it take over the downtown. So we'll help with a bit of pageantry. We'll help with also preparing our hotels and our businesses of what they can expect from the athletes, what they're looking for. We've already heard early indications just in terms of, some of the food choices that they're looking for, and lots of towels, and, where they want to store all their
things
equipment.
that are like really important that you don't realize.
You don't, they're not just your average guest who's coming to visit for a few days, and once they drop their suitcase off, they're good. So, we'll play a role in that from a community perspective, make sure that our community is ready to understand, how the road closures are going to work, and where they can come and volunteer and help us at the cheering stations. And so we'll take a really good look at how Ottawa Tourism can help with that. And then obviously as well, just giving people who are coming into town, athletes aside, friends and family, what else can they do while they're here in Ottawa, and making sure that we get them to visit our attractions and our businesses and our community, and then everybody wins.
For sure. And I mean, like, to me, I went for a run on Sunday morning. God, that
Well
seems like
done
a long
for
time
you.
ago. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
that's great.
Really flat. I just went along the canal, and like, obviously you've got, as you said, endless amounts of water. Cycling seems excellent. Great spaces for running. Is this something that you could then use with the sort of almost like the kind of the certification that you've brought an Ironman event here to be like, look, whatever kind of triathlon you want to do, this is a place that can serve that for the tourist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, we already do some maps for biking and running, but, maybe this is kind of a new tourist that might want to consider coming and following a similar route. It's obviously, the roads will be closed for Ironman, but it will be interesting to see, if it attracts people outside of just the dates of Ironman, for training or otherwise. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what it leads to, and some of the courses, like the bike route, as an example, is actually some of a very similar course to a CN cycle that we have here. And then some of the marathon routes that we use in May, using some of that. Some of the courses will be a little bit different. Some of the details aren't totally finalized yet, but a lot of people who either participate in the CN cycle and or the marathon will already be a little bit familiar with these routes. So it will be interesting if it also encourages them to maybe try for an Ironman, because they'll be familiar with the routes.
We've talked about the PWHL. We've talked about Ironman. What's sort of next for Ottawa as a sports destination? What kind of things are you targeting?
So we're really looking at our buildings right now and figuring out like what emerging sport is out there that maybe we should be considering. And we're looking at a lot of the women properties as well to see with organizations like what else could we be doing in this space, because we are seeing a lot of success. Looking at our convention center, which is in the heart of downtown, great for some mat sports. What more could we be doing in there? We are poised to probably have 2 arenas in our future. NHL arena probably a little bit further down the road, but a new TD Place arena, which is really exciting. The current arena will be open until the other one is ready to open its doors. So we still need to book that out and need to find sports that can fit in that building and are the right fit. But I think even with a pool potentially also, what kind of aquatic things can we get on board? But another sort of emerging market for us is wheelchair sports. We're hosting the 2026 wheelchair basketball in Ottawa, but we just hosted a women's national wheelchair championship. I think we would love to see a wheelchair curling event. We'd love to see like anything that's a wheelchair rugby also we would love to see here. So I think there's a big opportunity. We'll also look to see what kind of infrastructure improvements we can make, potentially with hosting a lot more wheelchair sports. The needs are a little bit slightly different. I think there's a big opportunity there on the wheelchair sports side of things. So I'd love to see that grow.
It all sounds like really exciting stuff. Thank you so much for your time. That was really fascinating.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to meet you.
All right, and that's all we've got time for on this episode of the SportsPro podcast. We'll be back, as I said, on Thursday when my colleague Eleanor Cufil will be speaking to Katrina Adams. Please come back and check out that interview. Really fascinating conversation. And I will be speaking to you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.